Welcome to You, the Protagonist. Just so that you know what to expect, we're going to start off by depathologizing mental illness. We're going to understand depression and anxiety, and I'm going to lead with my story. I'm going to meet you in vulnerability, and I'm going to lead the way. Then we're going to go into a 4-week process where you will rewrite your story, putting you in the driver's seat. We're going to turn you from a spectator in your life into an action taker, into the protagonist of your story. To start your story off, we need to go back and reframe what pathology is. We need to reframe what depression is. We need to reframe what mental health is. The reason for this is that the context of our departure is you getting back in the steering wheel of your life. You will be the one reauthoring and restoring your existence and the tale that brought you to this point. It is incredibly important that you retain, that you reconnect with the power within you to retell that story. I'm encouraging you on the outset to open up your mind to a different way of viewing your life and what you experience on the inside. We are going to irrevocably change your life. And the kicker is, you're the one to do it. Okay, so if we think about trauma, if we think about mental health, we need to discuss developmental trauma. Developmental trauma is such a critical part of our existence, and it goes unnoticed because developmental trauma is subjective. You are the only one that walked your story in your shoes with your genetic makeup. That genetic makeup is a critical component to what you experience as traumatic and how those traumas manifest in your body psychologically as well as relationally. You need that context so that you can tell your story. It's really important that you have a grip and an understanding of how your hardware operates. So bear with me. We're going to do a crash course into what happens in your head in times of adversity, and we're going to contextualize why it is that we feel the way we feel and react the way we react from a physiological perspective. Bear with me. When we are born, we are not born a clean slate. Because of this thing called epigenetics, you will inherit certain genetic traits from your parents. That means that you will experience certain things as traumatic and certain things not. And those traumas will manifest in your body in different ways. Remember, as well as relationally, as you learn how to communicate from them as well. Now, trauma is subjective. An event that completely shifts the way that I see the world and how the world sees me from my perspective is completely subjective. These canon events can influence you without you even knowing it. I have a quick example. I had the privilege of working with a pilot recently, and this individual really stressed and panicked when it came to their captain's exam. We went into it and we looked at his story and we contextualized all the events, and he said to me with a level of frustration that was palpable. He's like, I can't believe I still think about this stuff. And he brought up a memory. He was playing cricket at 15 or 16 years old, and he got the opportunity to open after playing fifth for a while. And for those who don't understand cricket, the opening batsman faces the first ball. All right. He faced that ball and it was just sitting there. He explains the story as this ball being dangled in front of him, just waiting to be hit. But he decided to play a conservative shot. He covered for his wicket. He played the safe shot instead of playing it the way, in his words, I knew I would have, or the way I should have. He was being incongruent with who he is. He got bowled out, and that regret stayed with him. He said during the process that his frustration isn't with how other people perceive him, but his own perception of his ability and his performance. And when he got to his captaincy exam, when he came to difficult events, crisis management, he'd block up because his amygdala remembered the feeling of not playing the shot. it triggered the alarm because that feeling was still with him. And in that, he produced adrenaline, lost access to his Broca's area and his prefrontal cortex, and he stumbles. Things speed up because of that adrenaline. He makes mistakes because he can't think, because in his mind, his brain still remembers the feeling of not taking the shot. It sowed a seed of self-doubt that sprouted roots in every situation. So remember that when we talk about the subjectivity of trauma, it can be anything. For me, I wouldn't really care, but for him, it was a powerful event. All right, so now you go through life and you record these events. Your hippocampus encodes, your amygdala feels, your hypothalamus regulates, and it sorts these events into categories of similarity to serve you in the here and now in service of survival, remember, not thriving, which means that these events inevitably become linked. When you are in the here and now, you're not just in the here and now, but you are living through the lenses of everything that happened up to that point. When we are triggered in the here and now, and your brain does its flip, you go into fight, flight, or fawn. Fawn is the lesser known of the three, but those are the people pleasers. People just get away with whatever. You find it very difficult to say no to things. That's where fawn comes from. Now, we can't live in that state. And that is why we develop distractors. Now, distractors are usually shortcuts to serotonin and dopamine. Those distractors are things like eating, full belly, serotonin, like pornography, the illusion of connection, alcohol, shortcut to dopamine, nervous system depressant, cigarettes, regulating that nervous system, overworking yourself, chasing that next income bracket, but eventually you burn out because you run out of dopamine. Netflix and chill takes the whole system offline. But this process doesn't end, which means that in your body, this builds mass until it compromises your ability to regulate and to distract. Another way to view this is you can see all these traumas drifting around in a cup. And someone or something in your environment shakes this cup up, and that feeling comes to the surface. In a perfect world, you use your coping strategies, your intellect, as much as you have access to it, to suppress, to navigate that experience. But that, my friends, takes energy. And so we go through life, and this cup fills up, especially in a fast-paced life. If you think of your high-pressure occupations, people like pilots, that cup fills up because they are disjointed, they're at home, they're at work, they're a family man, they're a captain, they're in charge of a lot of people. There's these downtimes while in the air. You never know when your cup's going to fill up. What's more is everyone's cup is a different size and has a different volume. You never know. And when it overflows, that overflow looks like depression because you are deprived of dopamine. It looks like anxiety because you're pumping adrenaline and you're on threat detection mode. And what's worse is the person closest to you will feel like the enemy. You see images or videos of people on planes attacking each other, road rage. If your partner says the wrong thing, you have a go at her or him. When the person closest to you, in proximity, in that moment, triggers an old hurt, that feeling comes up. And that's why, especially in close relationships, our partner can feel like the enemy because that's the only space where we get so close to each other that we cannot not press on old hurts and traumas. In any close quarters situation, I'm thinking about cockpits, I'm thinking about work situations, will trigger. And if you're not aware of what you bring to that space, you become reactive, you'll do damage. Or you'll shut down. Either way, you won't be living authentically and spontaneously. So in this space is where we become depressed, anxious, and perhaps even that bipolar picture as we try to regulate this. We get certain physical ailments. We get certain physical ailments like hyperhidrosis, fibromyalgia, and rheumatoid arthritis, as well as obesity, and even certain types of cancers. But that's still being researched. It's really important to understand how your hardware operates, how these traumas accumulate, and why you feel the way you feel. Now, what to do about this? There are various ways that you can deal with it, various psychotherapeutic modalities. There is cognitive behavioral therapy, which proposes that you can think in a different way and therefore behave in a different way. You can identify faulty thought patterns and thereby correct them. But remember, if you are activated, if you go into that fight or flight space, you don't have your brain at your disposal. That is why I prefer body-based psychotherapies, which means that you go to that feeling and you feel it, you experience it. And then there's a school of thought called narrative therapy, which looks at the story and the different elements of your story, what they mean, how you experience them, who are the role players, who are the characters, and what's more, who's writing the script. And that's what we're here to focus on, to rewrite your script. The first part of any psychotherapeutic modality is to look at the story. Why is that important? If you look at a physical injury, if you look at these events like a broken bone, you go through life and you sustain the injuries, you take the knocks, but you power through, you walk through them. They will heal, but that bone will be skew. It will be misaligned. You'll hobble along and you'll carry on. Now you want to run, you want to sidestep, you want to love, you want to be loved, you want to be vulnerable, you want to take a risk. Your amygdala will say, oh, I remember this pain. You'll end up operating around that sore point. You won't have full range of motion. You won't have access to who you are. Now, very importantly, if you go to that space, you go to a doctor and you explain to them this pain that you feel, they might give you a painkiller. It will solve the problem in the short term. But remember that cup? It won't empty it out. It'll just treat the symptom. And that's often what antidepressants do. And in the right time, they can be really beneficial because if pain is unbearable, we can't think, we can't move past it. But in the long term, if you stay on that, it stops this process. Or you can see it as artificially increasing the size of your cup. But eventually it will fill up anyway. Or if you just stop taking the medication, you'll have this overflow. Ideally, you'd go to a doctor. They might need to treat the pain in the short term, but they'll ask you, what happened before the time? What did you hear? What happened during? What did you feel? What happened afterwards? What stayed behind? They'll get the context of the injury. And that, my friends, is why your story is so important and why you are the only one that can tell it. Then when you understand the story, they can do an X-ray on that injury and they can correct it. They can realign it. And that's why this process is so difficult, because it will require you to go back so that you can realign that bone and heal it. And physiologically, a bone that heals is stronger than what it was before. Psychologically, the same thing happens. As you integrate those experiences into your wealth of wisdom, life becomes wow again. You become more resilient, adaptable, intentional. You get to choose to be you. There are many tools at your disposal. This is one of them. The amazing thing about this tool is you can do it. You don't need anyone else, and literally, the only excuses that there would be would come out of your mouth. no one else's. And that's what makes narrative therapy such a powerful modality. Because you're behind the steering wheel. You're the one in the cockpit, choosing the destination. And that, my friends, is power.